as it relates to the murder of Madison Mogan, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 3, as it relates to murder in the first degree for the murder of Kaylee Gonzalez, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 4, the first degree murder of Xana Kernodle, a human being, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 5, the first degree murder of Ethan Chapin, a human being, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Well, today was the fast approaching but much anticipated plea hearing of Bryan Kohberger. Let's go ahead and analyze exactly what happened in the 45-minute trial. I promise this won't take 45 minutes, but I want to go ahead and give you guys a full summary of everything that went on inside the courtroom. There was a couple of surprises, a few things that I learned, and a few things that I think you will find interesting. Let's go ahead and dive into exactly what happened, what the judge said, and exactly what Bryan Kohberger pled guilty to. Okay, so the judge opens up by saying that neither he or the court should be influenced by the outside sentiment. Only the facts and the law should guide the courtroom. He's just saying that he understands that this is a very public case and that this is obviously one of those TikTok cases. He's obviously not saying that explicitly, but I'm kind of reading between the lines here. He said that he has not read messages or listened to any voicemails. He forwards them to security and when appropriate, law enforcement. I imagine he's probably getting some anonymous death threats, maybe not anonymous, but he is, I imagine, in my opinion, getting some death threats, and that's why he said he's forwarding things to law enforcement. I can only imagine he's stuck in a really tricky place because you have the victims' families not wanting the plea deal going through, but he has to do his job and he has to go ahead and do what the defendants and what the prosecution wants. He asked that these messages and these outside influences stop trying to influence their way into the courtroom. The judge's role is to make sure the defendant in this scenario is given the making sure that he understands the plea deal and that he can accept or deny it freely and voluntarily. The judge himself can reject the plea deal if Bryan Kohberger does not accept all the elements of the crime. This was a very short notice. The judge said that he didn't have any details of the plea hearing until Monday afternoon. It is late Wednesday night, and the plea hearing was Wednesday morning. So he didn't have a ton of time, so he apologized for the travel accommodations that the defendant and the prosecution's families had to make to be there. He said he had no inkling of this plea deal beforehand. He said he was preparing up to 10,000 jurors to come to trial and prepare their jury questionnaires because he was anticipating a jury trial, and so that's what he was getting ready for. He said up to 10,000 jurors. That is so many jurors. You'll hear later on in this video that he actually scheduled an entire week away from all trials for the courthouse that he could reserve that just for the jury selection. So he has a written plea agreement. Bryan will need to plead guilty to all counts of these crimes. I believe there's 5, and I'll go ahead and list those 5 out. But there's a couple of stipulations. One, that the defense cannot argue for a lesser sentence, meaning they can't, after he accepts a plea deal, he came back, oh, can we get half a sentence? No. He's taking what's offered in the plea deal. He waives his right to appeal. He waives his right to reconsider the sentence. The court is not bound. The court can change the sentencing, although I don't really think that anything will change because these are, from what I understand, the highest length of sentences that these crimes you can be sentenced to. So he'll have 4 counts of life in prison and then 10 years for burglary, and those are the max. And I think the only thing the judge can do is lessen that. So if the judge feels like he can lessen those, or if he feels like he should lessen those sentences, he's telling Bryan that he has the authority to do so. Unless there's something I'm not aware of, I don't believe he can extend anything outside of the 4 life sentences and the 10 years in jail. The judge asks that if the defense has fully discussed all aspects of the plea deal with their client. They say yes. The judge asks Bryan to make sure that he understands the ramifications of his plea deal, that he understands that he will be pleading guilty to these 5 charges for 1 account of burglary and 4 counts of first-degree murder. He qualifies Bryan and explains the penalties. He qualifies Bryan by saying, like, are you under the influence? Have you had any alcohol? Have you had any drugs? Are you about your wits? Have you had everything that you need to make this decision? Have you had the right time? Have you talked to the right people? He completely tries to make sure that Bryan can't come back later and say, oh, I wasn't all with it. I wasn't with it mentally. He completely qualifies Bryan to make the decision. Again, 10 years for burglary and then 1 life sentence for each life that he took that he pleads guilty to. But we already know he's going to have to plead guilty to all of these accounts for the plea deal. The judge outlines all the rights that he has to give up and understands the charges he pleads guilty to. Of course, the judge asks if he was promised anything in exchange for the plea agreement. Like, he doesn't have a cousin or uncle saying, like, hey, if you take this, we'll get you out. Or, hey, if you take this, the judge will go easy on you. He's saying you don't, outside of the plea agreement that everybody knows, you don't understand that you are getting any other benefit outside of this plea agreement. Obviously, he says no. And then it's kind of a chilling factor in the courtroom. The judge says, and I quote, "Are you pleading guilty because you are guilty?" And Bryan says, "Yes." "Have you had enough time to decide?" "Yes." "Did you ask your attorney?" "Yes." "Are you satisfied with your representation?" Bryan answers yes to all of these. He asks if he knows the rights he's giving up. Like Bryan's giving up the right to a jury trial. He's giving up the right to presumed innocence. This is going to come up later. I'll explain why. He gives up the right to remain silent, meaning if he didn't have to go up onto the stand and testify and plead guilty. That's something the jury could have done, if I understand correctly. If you don't plead guilty, the state would have had to prove these 5 crimes, and the judge goes in detail. So the state then gives, basically the judge says like, hey, if you accept this plea deal, the state does not have to prove this. And the state goes on, the prosecution goes on for about 10 to 15 minutes, giving a very factual, step-by-step, time by time, line by line, everything about the crimes that were committed. And the judge is like, as I understand it, these are the facts of the case. After this 10 to 15 minute narrative from the prosecution, we go ahead and hear the judge ask this chilling question. Go ahead and listen for yourselves.
Therefore, with respect to count 1, burglary, felony, how do you plead, Mr. Kohberger, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 2, murder in the first degree, as it relates to the murder of Madison Mogan, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 3, as it relates to murder in the first degree for the murder of Kaylee Gonzalez, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 4, the first degree murder of Xana Kernodle, a human being, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 5, the first degree murder of Ethan Chapin, a human being, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
So there you have it. You have Bryan Kohberger pleading guilty to all 5 of these charges. It's absolutely chilling to hear him finally plead guilty to the 4 first-degree murders. Obviously, the burglary is bad, but not near as bad as those first-degree murders, in my opinion. It's still chilling to hear him say that. So let's go ahead and jump into what happens after Bryan pleads guilty. The judge then the judge basically asks, all right, it's like, all right, let's get to sentencing. So he said that he was blocking off the weeks July 23rd through that whole week of July 23rd to be able to work with the jury and do jury selection. So he said there's not going to be any trials going on that week anyways because he cleared the calendar. So they're going to go ahead and do the sentencing then. And he also says that he wants to have the courthouse cleared because he anticipates a lot of media will be waiting outside. So he wants to make that easy to be able to get defendants, prosecution in and out of the courthouse easily. The judge also asks the prosecution and defense if they should keep the non-dissemination order in place. Now, the non-dissemination order, from what I can tell, keeps all of the information privy to the trial still behind closed doors. So discovery, any kind of interviews, any kind of depositions, things like that, it keeps those all behind closed doors. So the judge is going to keep that order in place until after the sentencing. I believe the judge says that he can change this up if he feels like it's necessary, but the defense and the prosecution both agreed to this. Obviously, the judge says if you had a bond, there's no bond anyways. And this is where something that I thought was super interesting. He says that Bryan is not going to be able to appear back in civilian clothes again because he waived that presumption of innocence. So I'm sure that was one of those first reality hits for Bryan where he's like, wow, like, yeah, no, like I'm now completely guilty. Like I confessed I'm guilty to the public, to the court, and this is now my life. No more civilian clothes, and he will be locked up for the rest of his life. So obviously terrible for the victims. I know that a lot of the victims' families are extremely upset by the plea deal. I know some are okay with it, but the court made the decision today, and as far as I can tell, the plea deal is going to go through without any issues. Bryan Kohberger has pled guilty to all 5 of these charges. So now what lays next? So what's next? We're going to go ahead and on July 23rd, we have sentencing week. They said that they can go into the July 24th if they need. But July 23rd, the prosecution said that the families would like to have a closing statement. This is pretty common in scenarios like this. So Bryan's going to hear these families and what they say to Bryan. It's probably going to be something very hard to hear for everybody involved. But this is kind of the family's last opportunity to get off their chest verbally what they're wanting to say. So I'll go ahead and cover that. Subscribe if you guys want to hear that. Subscribe if you guys enjoyed this analysis. Let me know if I missed anything down in the comments or if you saw any other tidbits. I'd be fascinated to hear your guys' perspective. I'm not perfect. I am learning how to cover these kind of things. I love keeping up with them. So if you see anything, don't be afraid to leave me some comments, tips, and tricks down in the comments regarding covering these type of court cases. But like always, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.